Another day, another story. The automobile was first invented and perfected in Germany and France in the late 1800s, though Americans quickly came to dominate the automotive industry in the first half of the 20th century. Henry Ford innovated mass production techniques that became standard, and Ford, General Motors and Chrysler emerged as the Big Three auto companies by the 1920s. Manufacturers funneled their resources to the military during World War II, and afterward automobile production in Europe and Japan soared to meet growing demand. Welcome to Thibaut Emment Channel. Once vital to the expansion of American urban centers, the industry had become a shared global enterprise with the rise of Japan as the leading automaker by 1980. When were cars invented? The 1901 Mercedes, designed by Wilhelm Maybach for Daimler Motor Gesellschaft, deserves credit for being the first modern motor car in all essentials. Its 35 horsepower engine weighed only 14 pounds per horsepower, and it achieved a top speed of 53 miles per hour. By 1909, with the most integrated automobile factory in Europe, Daimler employed some 1,700 workers to produce fewer than 1,000 cars per year. Henry Ford and William Durant. Bicycle mechanics J. Frank and Charles Duryea of Springfield, Massachusetts, had designed the first successful American gasoline automobile in 1893, then won the first American car race in 1895, and went on to make the first sale of an American-made gasoline car the next year. 30 American manufacturers produced 2,500 motor vehicles in 1899, and some 485 companies entered the business in the next decade. In 1908, Henry Ford introduced the Model T and William Durant founded General Motors. Model T. Given the American manufacturing tradition, it was also inevitable that cars would be produced in larger volume at lower prices than in Europe. The Ford Motor Company greatly outpaced its competitors in reconciling state-of-the-art design with moderate price. Cycle and Automobile Trade Journal called the four-cylinder, 15-horsepower, $600 Ford Model N, 1906-1907, the very first instance of a low-cost motor car driven by a gas engine having cylinders enough to give the shaft a turning impulse in each shaft turn, which is well built and offered in large numbers. Deluged with orders, Ford installed improved production equipment and after 1906 was able to make deliveries of 100 cars a day. Automotive industry growing pains. Ford's mass production techniques were quickly adopted by other American automobile manufacturers. European automakers did not begin to use them until the 1930s. The heavier outlays of capital and larger volume of sales that this necessitated ended the era of easy entry and freewheeling competition among many small producers in the American industry. Invention of the automobile. Most of the remaining independents were wiped out in the Great Depression, with Nash, Hudson, Studebaker, and Packard hanging on only to collapse in the post-World War II period. The Model T was intended to be a farmer's car that served the transportation needs of a nation of farmers. Its popularity was bound to wane as the country urbanized and as rural regions got out of the mud with passage of the 1916 Federal Aid Road Act and the 1921 Federal Highway Act. Car sales stall. By 1927, replacement demand for new cars was exceeding demand from first-time owners and multiple car purchasers combined. Given the incomes of the day, automakers could no longer count on an expanding market. Installment sales had been initiated by the makers of moderately priced cars in 1916 to compete with the Model T, and by 1925 about three-quarters of all new cars were bought, on time, through credit. Although a few expensive items, such as pianos and sewing machines, had been sold on time before 1920, it was installment sales of automobiles during the 20s that established the purchasing of expensive consumer goods on credit as a middle-class habit and a mainstay of the American economy. GM introduces planned obsolescence. Market saturation coincided with technological stagnation. In both product and production technology, innovation was becoming incremental rather than dramatic. The basic differences that distinguish post-World War II models from the Model T were in place by the late 1920s. The self-starter, the closed all-steel body, the high-compression engine, hydraulic brakes, synchromesh transmission and low-pressure balloon tires. The remaining innovations, the automatic transmission and drop frame construction, came in the 1930s. Moreover, with some exceptions, cars were made much the same way in the early 1950s as they had been in the 1920s. World War II and the auto industry. The automobile industry had played a critical role in producing military vehicles and war materiel in the First World War. During World War II, in addition to turning out several million military vehicles, American automobile manufacturers made some 75 essential military items, most of them unrelated to the motor vehicle. These materials had a total value of $29 billion, one-fifth of the nation's war production. Because the manufacture of vehicles for the civilian market ceased in 1942 and tires and gasoline were severely rationed, motor vehicle travel fell dramatically during the war years. Cars that had been nursed through the Depression long after they were ready to be junked were patched up further, ensuring great pent-up demand for new cars at the war's end. Rise of Japanese automakers. Engineering in the post-war era was subordinated to the questionable aesthetics of non-functional styling at the expense of economy and safety. And quality deteriorated to the point that by the mid-1960s American-made cars were being delivered to retail buyers with an average of 24 defects a unit, many of them safety-related. Moreover, the higher unit profits that Detroit made on gas-guzzling, road cruisers, were made at the social costs of increased air pollution and a drain on dwindling world oil reserves. U.S. carmakers retool. In response, the American automobile industry in the 1980s underwent a massive organizational restructuring and technological renaissance. Managerial revolutions and cutbacks in plant capacity and personnel at GM, Ford and Chrysler resulted in leaner, tougher firms with lower break-even points, enabling them to maintain profits with lower volumes in increasingly saturated, competitive markets. Manufacturing quality and programs of employee motivation and involvement were given high priority. The industry in 1980 undertook a 5-year, $80 billion program of plant modernization and retooling. Functional aerodynamic design replaced styling in Detroit studios, as the annual cosmetic change was abandoned. Legacy of the U.S. auto industry. The automobile has been a key force for change in 20th century America. During the 1920s, the industry became the backbone of a new consumer goods-oriented society. By the mid-1920s it ranked first in value of product, and in 1982 it provided 1 out of every 6 jobs in the United States. But though automobile ownership is virtually universal, the motor vehicle no longer acts as a progressive force for change. New forces, the electronic media, the laser, the computer, and the robot, probably foremost among them, are charting the future. A period of American history that can appropriately be called the automobile age is melding into a new age of electronics. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.